Hi, everybody. I wanted to go through this again to take out the years that were in there before so that maybe it's a little bit easier for people to see how the book of Exodus and the book of Joshua overlay the entirety of world history. It is very easy to determine how many years there are going to be, and when you know the years of specific events, to plot with specificity the beginning and ending of everything very exactly. This is the timeline of world history. And again, it is overlaid by the book of events in the book of Exodus and Joshua. Starts with the giving of the law on Sinai correlating to creation. When you have that benchmark event, the giving of the law in Exodus 19, you have the next 40 days or 40 Jubilee years from creation dedicated to Moses going up the mount to receive the tables of stone handwritten by the finger of God containing the law. Moses comes down the mount and is welcomed to the people rabble-rousing. He thinks that they're being overtaken in the camp, but no, really, they're just partying and worshiping strange gods because they lost faith. So he, as a demonstration of them breaking the law by not honoring the very first commandment, which is thou shalt have no other gods before me, he smashes the tables of stone. And he gives the Levites the commission to deal with the people, to slay the rebellious. And then in chapter 32, he begins to intercede on their behalf, offering himself in their place if God would spare them. And God says, no, you will not be allowed to pay, or no one who did not commit the sin will be allowed to pay for the sin. So Moses goes back up the mount for 40 days to write the law again. At the end of that period of time, he comes down and his face is shining like the sun. He's got to cover it because it's so bright that people can't look at him. The rest of the book of Exodus from chapter 35 through the end, chapter 40, is them building the tabernacle. Chapter 40 ends with them rearing the tabernacle on the first day of the first month in the second year in the wilderness. And then 40 years are spent in the wilderness. On the 10th day of the first month, Nisan 10, they come up out of the Jordan and encamp in Gilgal in their promised land for the first time. This is a benchmark event. There is a 7-year conquest for the land of Canaan, at the end of which, in Joshua 13, the lots are parceled to the tribes. So this is the overlay of world history from the beginning to the end, detailed in the events and the timeline of the events laid out in the books of Exodus and Joshua. So how does that correlate to anything else? Okay, well, let's look at the whole of world history with historical and prophetic events intermixed. So let's fill in some of this. Jesus is going to be building the spiritual house during this time period, correlating to the time that the tabernacle was reared in the wilderness. That represents the time from the life of Christ. If you were to actually fill this in with numbers, this period in time begins with circa 16 AD and would go to it would run for 49 years, and the 50th year next after that is when the next Jubilee would be declared. So from 16-ish AD to 65-ish AD is the period of time that Jesus had his ministry, that he died for sins under the old covenant, that he ushered in the new covenant, and rose in glory. After which, he began to build the spiritual house until such a time as the spiritual house is removed. And what else happens? Okay, so let's fill in some things related to this time period. Remember Moses, these benchmark events overlaying from the book of Exodus and Joshua, this was the period of time that Moses came down the mount with a face shining like the sun. What did that preview? And how did Moses' actions after the first 40 days overlay or foreshadow what Jesus' actions would be during that specific time in world history on the whole timeline of world history? Well, because after the first 40 days, the Levites had to deal with the people, and Moses was interceding on their behalf, offering himself in their place, and God said no. But what did he wind up doing? He let Jesus offer himself in the place of sinful mankind, because Jesus' sacrifice was complete and perfect. So Jesus, during the similar period in time where Moses came down with his face shining like the sun, Jesus interceded on behalf of the people, offered himself in their place, and the dispensations changed. The old covenant was put away. The new covenant began, and Jesus rose in glory. His countenance shined like the sun. So again, during this time period, Jesus actually rises in glory here, dies for the sins under the old covenant, under the new covenant, begins to build a spiritual house. For these 40 Jubilees from his death on the cross, his resurrection, building the spiritual house until such a time as the spiritual house gets removed and the physical temple gets rebuilt, which is the strength behind covenant confirmation. There will be a 7-year conquest for the land, after which Ezekiel tells us there will be a parceling of the lots to the tribes in the kingdom. Ezekiel 40 through 48 is a perfect overlay for the benchmark event in Joshua 4 through Joshua 13. There is a benchmark event in Joshua. It was them entering the promised land. Here, it's going to be the rebuilding of the temple to start the 70th week. In both cases, they warred for the land. There will be, in the 70th week, war for the land, at which, the end of which, the land will rest from war. 70th week, Jesus will come back, put an end to the war for the land. And according to Ezekiel 48, the lots will once again be parceled to the 12 tribes. Daniel 12 actually talks about this. There, from the midpoint of the week, there are 1,260 days until he shall have accomplished the power to scatter the power of the people. 1,260 days from the midpoint of the week to the end of the week. Then there's 1,290 from the midpoint to something else, and 1,335 from the midpoint to yet something else. And Daniel is told to go his way and rest, that he's going to stand in his lot at the end of the 1,335 days, because he's going to be resurrected with the Old Testament saints. And at the end of that 1,335 from the midpoint of the week, the lots will have been parceled to the tribes according to Ezekiel 48, and Daniel is going to be standing in his lot. So this is how we know that from creation to kingdom, there are a specific number of years, correlating to a specific number of Jubilee cycles, which you calculate forward and backward based on the start, which is when Israel entered the promised land. Began a benchmark event, which began to count Sabbath cycles and led to the declaration of Jubilee. There are a specific number of Jubilee years until the temple gets rebuilt. 7-year conquest for the land, and then the parceling of the lots to the tribes afterward. Just like Israel entered the promised land, there was a specific number of years that they were given to wander, at which point they were allowed into their land. 40, 40, 40. If you guys have any questions about this, let me know. But this is, without specific years, how the books of Exodus and Joshua overlay the entirety of world history. There is no need for us to be unsure about things, because if it doesn't come right out and tell you, there are similitudes and or types and shadows that tell us things are precise and definitive. I'll see you guys later.